Well, hello, everybody. I think we will get started. Yeah, nice if I got my
Agenda?
What am I doing with it? I left that folder home, of course. Why not? There's a lot of new faces today, which is really good to see. As I mentioned, we will be recording this, so we want to be sure that when you're talking, that you're talking into the microphone, because I know many people don't like to be recorded or on video. So, but it's really tough for people listening later to, even when you're trying to do the minutes, hear what's going on. So anyhow, just make sure the light's on, and if you have a handheld microphone, that the light is green. We have a bunch of new people today. I'm Mary Ann Naif, chair. And I think we shall start out by welcoming our new members and also perhaps introducing ourselves. So why don't we start over here on the left, Deirdre?
I'm Deirdre Strachan, and I'm most interested in roads and keeping them from being flooded.
And I'm Jay McCrite, and everything but social vulnerability is sort of my thing.
That's right. Nancy?
I'm Nancy West. I'm on the Conservation Commission, and anything environmental is my shtick.
Dan?
I'm Dan Hobeck. I'm also on the planning board. My interest is in area of interest is in community planning.
I'm Ken Emick. I'm also on the Harpswell Town Lands Committee, so I have focus is on town properties and how they're impacted by sea level rise and severe climate events.
My name is Billy Saxton. I'm here as a member of the Harbor and Waterfront Committee, so that's my interest.
I'm Tim Tier. I'm here as just on this committee.
Because you have an interest in?
Oh, because I have an interest particularly in all things environmental, as does Nancy, all things science, as well as I have spent years working on a variety of different environmental projects, but in particular, my current focus is on climate change and projects related to climate change.
Sean?
Hi, Sean Ruel. I am on the Housing Committee as well in town, and I'm also an arborist, so I'm paying a lot of attention to the way that the trees are being impacted around here. So
That's great.
yeah.
I'm glad we need a little cross-pollination. That's great. Bad pun, but we've been working a lot on the Conservation Commission and trees and everything, so. In the back row?
I'm Jack.
Just the way you said that is true. It's true. Right.
So,
Okay, good. Just in time, Brittany. Just because we're just introducing all the new members. Sit over by the table there so you can talk into and then you can probably tell the group who you represent and,
Right now?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Brittany. Brittany Tuck. I'm on the this, but I'm here to, but I can contribute.
Right, great. And before Margaret's introduced, should I let you sit down, Howie, before I ask you to introduce yourself?
Okay.
How about right over there where there's a microphone?
Okay.
Well, why don't we let Margaret introduce herself while Howie's getting himself settled?
And I'm staff liaison.
You're on, Howie.
Hi, I'm Howie Marshall. I'm the chair of the Energy and Technology Committee.
Right, great. So I probably should have done this first, but we have a number of new members. And just as a little background, the committee is made up of groups from all the committees, many of the committees in town that have an interest in climate resilience and climate change and roads and flooding. So we have members of the various committees that have an interest. Howie's here from the energy technology because we get into the solar piece or the energy side of it that they do a lot of investigation on. Billy here from Harbor and Waterfront. We're going to be probably getting more into that as time goes by. We've had really severe weather in the last 2 years that the state is looking at now to mitigate some of the effects of flooding and the effects of how it affects the fishermen. And there's a little more, I think, interest from the state now about doing something to take care of those situations. The committee is part of Maine Won't Wait, the governor's office policy, and they have also changed their direction to include housing, and that was the reason we added the housing committee, as well as taking care of flooding. So the committee here tries to get input from all the committees in town with a focus on what are the most urgent and upcoming items that happen as climate change goes on. And and we have been very helpful in obtaining grant money to proceed on some of these assessment and projects as time has gone by. So we've received now 5 grants from the state, which has been helpful in putting some of these projects together in town, and took care of changing the lighting here in the town office to LED and doing an energy audit, and now is looking at, you'll talk about that, Howie, when you get to your report. But just to give everybody an idea of kind of how we're put together and what our focus is. And Brittany, it's great to have you here from Marine Resources. So between that and Harbor and Waterfront, we're hoping that part of the working waterfront we'll have more of a focus on it, as well as, the town lands too, because we've done a lot. And then the grant that we didn't get,
Why did you point to me?
because you're on the planning board, and that was designed, I'll talk about that more, but that was designed. So anyhow, that's kind of where we are, and glad to have you all on the committee. We meet once a month at 4 o'clock on the first Tuesday. I think I reviewed the policies. If anybody has any questions, a little bit more, I didn't talk about the sustainability plan. This is on our website. I hope it's on our website. And it kind of gives the plan that we will be working to. And we set out in 2024 to pick four projects that are our topmost priority. And one of them was, I'm just reading them here, actually. Anyhow, the grants that we have gotten so far deal directly with what are it's a 10-year priority plan with a short, medium, and long-term goals. So,
Do you want to mention Spira?
yes, I could mention Spira.
Or the task force that generated the town's high priorities?
Yes.
Okay.
Would you like to do that? Or would you like me to do it?
You can do it, you're the chair.
Oh, thanks. There was a vulnerability study done in 2018, in the height of COVID, actually, or right before COVID. And it went through a checklist to see where we felt there were vulnerabilities in town. And because money can only be spent on town property when you're spending money for projects, it had to do with the infrastructure of the town. So that was the town roads, the town landings, and but also that we knew we had other vulnerabilities as well, which are all part of this plan, whether it be planning for the vulnerable population, whether it is emergency preparedness. And as a result of that, we put this sustainability plan together, gave it a prioritization, and then went to the state and showed them what we had planned to do. They accepted that and made us a member, made us a community action resiliency member, which allows us to even apply for the grants. As an outburst, I'm going to ask Jay to talk about Spira, which is,
One of the things we did as a committee was decide to ask for a reserve account, and Spira is sustainability, I wrote it down. last night.
Sustainability Plan Implementation Reserve Account.
Yeah, so we asked for a fund so that we could be nimble. When grants were coming up, we could, if we needed matching funds, or if there was a need for some funding, if we would lose it if we didn't have that. So that was approved by the town at town meeting, and that's been being used for like the lighting and some of the other grants, and
right.
we're talking about it for what Howie's going to talk about later, with help with what we might do about solar or not. But it's made us nimble.
It's allowed us to move ahead, because otherwise we would have to wait to town meeting to get approval to spend the money. And many of these opportunities don't last a year. So, none of them do, actually. So the town did allow us to work from a $100,000 fund, which we funded over 2 years. And we also replenish what we used in the following year. So we've been able to make good use of those funds. Okay. Talking about that, we had two oh,
You don't have to do it now, but we do need to do it.
okay. I'm going to talk about the two grant awards, and then we're
Yeah,
going to do minutes. We received funds, we talked about this last month, for the mapping project that will be very, very helpful to the planning board. And what it is we've had maps that we have used that have been pretty basic to just do modeling. It's what they show online. They add 3 feet to what is showing the standard elevation. However, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
However, as many of us know in town, our shoreline doesn't make the normal variation in flooding equal as you would on a beach. And because of the inlets and the wave action with many of the islands, it can either add to that or subtract from it. So it was felt that as we go forward, it would be good to have modeling done that would take wave action into consideration as far as a number of other velocity items. Billy Saxton had this project on their property many years ago, and it worked to your favor, actually.
We funded it ourselves, it wasn't.
Right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
And that basically would have said he had, I don't know, what was they showing you were going to have?
24 feet, and we're down to 14.
Yeah, so,
Save 10 feet of elevation.
yeah, it's named elevation there because of just the location of it and the configuration. In other places, it's going to show a higher need, depending on where you're located and the configuration of a cove or so forth. We feel this will be very important, especially for the planning board as they go forward when they're talking about changing ordinances, when you start talking about marsh migration and how to plan for that. And also just regarding just normal day-to-day changes that are going to happen. And we're thinking even on the roads, we've been able to, because I had this question asked by the funders yesterday, what are we going to get anything more than what we've gotten so far? But we have done 5 projects where we've had engineering assessments on basically road crossings, which are pretty easy to identify because you can watch them, you know when they're going to flood, and we know what we have to do in those areas. But there's a lot of other areas we don't really know how accurate the modeling is. But if you're building a house there, you would like to know how to plan for that, you know. Maybe you're going to have to build it up more than you would have thought to, depending on what the modeling shows. So we feel that it's going to be a very important tool for the town and for the townspeople. And the question was, because they have not, they haven't signed the contract yet. They need more information, and that was one of their questions. I referred it back to the engineers and asked them to perhaps help me explain it to them better.
One of the things you didn't mention is that the detailed map will be available online, so the people who are on private roads, like most of us are, will have access to the same kind of analysis, which meshes sea level rise with storm surges and wave action. And therefore, people on private roads can do some planning for the future if their road is going to be susceptible to flooding. The town can't address that because the town can't act on private roads, but the people who live on the private roads will then have the data that they need to make decisions for their road.
Right. So I foresee that it's going to go through, but they just need more information. And then the other study, which we applied for, and SPIRA funds went towards that as well, was to do a carrying capacity study for Harpswell waters. And this had to do with carrying capacity regarding aquaculture and shellfish harvesting. It's quite a costly project, but we put it into 2 parts, and SPIRA added funding for that. It was going to be through the Maine Outdoor Heritage Fund, through Department of Marine Resources, and it was for approximately $25,000, which was going to do all the collection of data. However, we didn't get that grant. So we will try again someplace else. And part of it was there was only $75,000 available, and they had like 25 people. And they spent the first, they rate you, and they spent it all in the first 3 applications.
Do we know where we
Yes.
were?
We were down around 5th or 6th. But I was able to read the way they rate it and how they weight it, and that was very interesting, and I thought you might be interested, or many of you might be interested in that, because that, I think, is going to be really helpful as we go
Other
forward.
grants, yeah.
Sort of
Yeah.
strategize future grants?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So, so that's kind of, those are the 2 grant awards and where we're at. So we have one, and the other one, we got to keep looking. I think we're out, we better do something about minutes. Somebody have a chance to look at them, and,
So before we move on, I was just going to say, for those of you that are visitors and new, the evolution of this committee has been to see, well, what could we do about changing climate and the potential impacts on Harpswell? So part of that has been funding studies to try to give us a better understanding what those potential impacts could be, and then doing other studies that would say, well, if these are the impacts, what could you do about it? And that's led us to now moving in the direction of trying to say, okay, now we have a sense of what we might be able to do in some cases. Can we move forward and do something? So we have other possible funding to try to take some actions in a few places, and much of it is related to flooding and flooding of roads. So just to say that the strategy, that's been a general strategy, and the Spira fund that we've gotten from the town has been really helpful, because in the absence of that fund, it would be very difficult to seize opportunities. We've been able to show that we've quite well used that fund to seize opportunities and move forward. And it's important to report on the grants and what we do, because that puts it gives you a real practical look at what we talk about when we talk about resilience. What do we mean? Well, look at the grants and say, well, what are we trying to do?
thank you, Tim. Encapsulated it quite well. Okay. Minutes.
I had one, there's a double word
Okay,
or an extra word.
Okay.
It's in the welcome section. Welcome to Dan. I hope it's spelled right there.
It is.
Okay.
Double check.
And there's the last line, how can Harpswell make, reduce? and
Reduce.
Just take out the make.
Yep.
Otherwise, they're divine, I think.
okay, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Okay, second? Okay, all in favor? Great. Okay,
Thank you, Jay.
thank you. So let's move on to some updates. First of all, from Energy and Technology. Howie?
I don't have a lot to say, but I will just reiterate some of the stuff in the minutes from last month for the
Sure.
people, for the new people. The Energy and Technology Committee is looking to hire a consultant to help us analyze the best way to use renewable energy for the town. Currently, we're subscribed to a solar farm, but it's proving to be a problem in some ways, and it would be more effective if we owned our own solar panels. And so we've talked to 2 possible consultants. The second one was just after our last meeting. Next week was the energy meeting. They're both very good candidates, and at our next meeting next week, we will flesh out an RFQ that Christie gave me a template. And we need to fill in what it is we're looking for among all the other stuff that's the town's regular stuff that's just required in there. So that's pretty much where we are. That it'll be good. The problem has been that every time we go around the circle, we find the goal has moved, and so we're trying to get someone with more experience to look at the things that we've considered and help us figure out which ones are sensible. So this was something that this committee recommended the $12,000 that the Energy Committee requested to hire a consultant, and then out of the SPIRA funds, and that has been approved by the Select Board, so now we just have to pick one of these consultants, and that's our next step.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions?
Howie, once the decision's made and they get on board, how long do you think it'll take for them to actually come back with 2 or 3 months, or?
Yeah, I think it's only going to be, a few months, because we're not trying to plan the whole thing. What we're trying to do is figure out what we should be aiming for. And one of the problems is that at the moment, all of the incentives and rebates and everything are up in the air. So most likely what we're going to do is narrow it down to a sensible plan and then sit and wait till we know that we'll be able to make it, to do it cost effectively. One of the things that would be really sad would be get the whole thing planned, hire a company to build it, and then have the incentives
Go away. Yeah.
and have it cost a lot more. So, and possibility of the solar panels, which are all imported, getting fat tariffs slapped on them, but also, the price could double in no time.
Right.
And so what we want to do is make a plan and then sit tight till it's not going to be risky to do it.
Sounds like a plan. Good. Okay. The next item, well, one of our prioritization actions was to, I can never find it, Nancy, when I'm looking for it.
It's at the end, it's H.
H.
It's H.
Well, basically, when we first started talking about this 4 years ago, we were talking about what we were doing for the town infrastructure, and we had requests from the public saying, what are you going to do to show us what we can do? So we've been working on trying to put together a website or a handout that would take all this information that's out there, boil it down into some simple go-to steps that then people could research on their own when they want to, let's just say, thinking about energy audit or heat pumps. Where do you go? What should you be thinking about? So this has taken a little while to put together. But right now, Nancy and Jay and myself, and we have Gail Hayes from HA, is working on that. So would you like to talk a little bit about that project?
Sure. The subgroup has been meeting to try to figure out what's important to get out to people and how to get it out to people, and trying not to do something that's already done or add to something that's we don't really need because there's so much out there. And there's a lot out there and it's confusing. So as Harpswell, we're part of Mid-Coast Council of Governments, and they bring different groups, towns from the Mid-Coast together. So Marianne and I attended a meeting not too long ago, and Rousick was there, and they've produced a neat little booklet about resiliency and sustainability. And it was, to me, it was like, this is it. This is the format we want, and this is the kind of information we want. Of course, we would tailor it to Harpswell and not do it exactly the same, but they would love for us to copy their idea, and the designer is fine if we use the model.
Use the template, yep.
So the subgroup has been meeting and looking at what this has, and how are we going to make it Hartsville specific? What do we want to add? Nancy, for example, has put together a go-to bag to be ready for emergencies. Marianne had the idea of a question, did you know that? And then ... Because you could go on forever and have, Oxford Dictionary, which wouldn't be very useful. So we're trying to make it very user-friendly and accessible, and it would be, once it's done, it would be on the website, but it would also be in print form.
Yep.
And one of the things that I'm really excited about is this has nice little pictures from Arousik in this case.
I have the colors.
Oh, you have the colors?
I have the colored
Okay.
one. Why don't you
That's even
show them the
better.
colored ones?
Yeah, aqua. Nice. So I would love, part of our mission is to involve the community. So to put out a call for pictures from Harpswell and to try to get, not from one, Harpswell Heritage Land Trust gets pictures. My vision is we don't use what's already out there. We ask people to do this, and as we're doing that, we're also informing them, they're part of the
Process.
picture and learning about it as we get pictures. We give some specifics. So I'm very excited about that. Very excited about Nancy's go-to bag. And if anybody wants to join the committee.
A few words.
Sure.
Before we got this brochure from Arousik, I want everybody to know that the anchor has been incredibly helpful along the way. And when we have done something like replace the LED bulbs or conduct an energy audit on town infrastructure, in this case, this building, the anchor has carried articles with specific instructions for townspeople as to how they can do the very same thing. It's a principle that the task force, when in the old days, the task force bought into, and from the very beginning, this committee has bought into, that what the town has done, we want to make it also accessible so that the townspeople can do it with their own homes. We also recognize that not everybody in Harpswell is online, and so we're trying to find different avenues to reach people, to reach everybody, to help them be resilient with respect to the climate and also be prepared for emergencies, which are climate emergencies, or say wildfires, which Maine has had and probably will have in the future. So one is long-term, how to plan for and mitigate climate change, and the other one is short-term. If there is a crisis, like the storms we had in January of last year, or the fire on Long Reach or Doughty Point, are people prepared to deal with that, even if they cannot drive themselves to safety? Okay.
And keeping it realistic, what people can really do.
Good, thank you. Oh, the next item.
See the question mark?
Yes. The next item on the, you'll see, is called the mitigation investment policy, which we have a few of us that have been trying to work on this for a few months. And we did get caught up on one thing, was how to do something right away. Where this goes back to our sustainability plan that asks us to discuss a draft policy, which I'd like to do tonight a little bit to get us started. I'll ask Ken and Deirdre to get us started, and Tim, because they're working on it. However, before we do that, Deirdre is our grant lady, and she came across an opportunity that she thought would we be able to do something, a temporary fix for flooding. Deirdre, are you prepared to talk about your box walls a little bit?
I mean, I can give some background to
Just
begin with
background,
on
yeah.
roads.
Yeah.
Just so you all know, we have 153 miles of roads in Harpswell, and of that, the town is responsible for 27.8 miles of them, and about 2/3 of the roads in town are private roads. So we're looking, as the town, at the public roads that we're responsible for. And over the past years, we've carried out 5 engineering studies that look at what would the town need to do at different levels of sea level rise to make the roads passable. And the bottom line of those studies is that the town would have to spend in the neighborhood for, 1 to 2 feet of sea level rise in the neighborhood of over $5 million. So it's a serious investment that the town would have to make in order to mitigate the sea level rise. So the engineers that we dealt with suggested that we had an alternative. And for short-term mitigation, which was to get portable floodgates that we could put up at when we knew we were having a major storm. And Ken is the pro about what these would look like, but they would be significantly less costly, obviously, but they have a number of complications because they have to be put up, taken down, and bought.
And cleaned.
Right, this is, the product that I think this engineering firm recommended is called a box wall, which is really just a flood barrier for a road. This is one product it comes in relatively small segments that one person can easily set up. And a lot of demonstrations, you have a couple people, and within an hour or two time, if you expect, for example, a storm to coincide with a king tide, for example, and you say Abner Point Road is one of the roads we've used as an example, you want to try to keep that open and accessible for at least for emergency vehicles. You could bring out these box walls and set up basic barriers on both sides of Abner Point Road and keep it more or less accessible during this short-term flooding event. There's some of the challenges with it is it was brought out, I think, by our fire departments, is that these barriers, and I can send out a picture of it, rely on a fairly smooth surface. And a lot of our roads, especially when you get to the edges, is not that great. And so as you go to smooth concrete or pavement to put this on, your road is getting smaller. So that may limit some places around town where these barriers could be used. But it's still, I think, as we're considering viable, especially if we get a grant, it seems like an option to keep looking at. It buys us time to look at big capital projects, which some roads inevitably will have to be raised up. But if you're only looking at seasonal king tides or storm, this could buy the town a good bit of time for a lot less money.
Right. And where we are now this is something that you're trying to think of the town entity that would be kind of responsible for putting them up and taking them down, which gets us to the fire and rescue. And where we are now with Mike Drake is we're not sure that, we don't know how much water the fire trucks can go through, first of all, now. No, so, but where we are now, he suggested that we come to they have like a meeting of the 3 departments periodically. And the next time they have a meeting, we come and talk to this. And we can at least get a sense if they think it's something that's worthwhile to spend the money on. Because you run into a bunch of things, you got to set them up, you got to take them down, you got a place to store them.
Storage was a question, definitely.
And you got to, somebody mentioned, hose them off, clean them up, and dry them up at the end. Much of our flooding in town is short-lived. It's during the high tide, and it might be for 4 hours or so at the most, and then it drains off. So it's I think a good possibility to think about, but needs definitely more discussion.
Ken, is it possible for our road crews, this isn't fair to ask you, but has anybody addressed whether or not it would be possible to make the edges of the road flat? Like to
It's
add
not
asphalt
necessarily
to
flat. I
flatten?
think it's more smooth. I think it's more
Okay,
the
so-
breaking off, and that's maintenance. After they repave Mountain Road, it's
It's
great
beautiful.
for 6 months or so, and then it's back to
And then you go, they keep putting road overlays, and you go over on 24 on Bailey Island, and it drops off on the edge like that.
Right, but if you could make the road
Yeah,
wide enough and high enough on the edges, then perhaps you could use those barricades.
You could, and I think a lot of the idea is that even if you had to go down one lane, as long as that lane is wide enough for a fire truck to get through, you got some value there.
so,
Ken, would this be something, a road association, is it, a private group could
Sure.
decide they want to?
Also,
They could, and if it's probably a small enough area, it would be a lot more viable. They aren't expensive. I think, as a very rough estimate, I've forgotten all my notes, I think it was
it was
roughly,
100,000, wasn't it, 120?
we were looking, but that was a pretty good stretch of
That was for Abner
road
Point
we're
Road,
looking
yeah.
at. So, I mean, you were looking at, what, $30 a foot, something like that, if I remember right?
Yeah.
Or, Lane gets the right number afterwards, I'll let everyone know, but.
So the figure in the minutes that Deirdre, I think Deirdre offered up last time was that to do this for all of the feasible roads, and in my opinion, that doesn't include Dingley Island Road, it would be $500,000 for the town roads on which it could work, plus or minus Dingley Island Road. But I think that's problematic in its own way.
and I mean, obviously, this is a short-term solution because by 2050, we're expecting, up to 2 feet rise in sea level, according to the engineers. So, the town does need to start thinking about how to plan for the $5 million price tag in today's dollars, which are obviously changing as time goes forward.
And that seems a good lead into the mitigation investment policy, I think.
Yes. So the Budget Advisory Committee would like to start thinking about, there has been talk about should the town start to put money away or plan, put money away. We're not asking for an amount to be put away so much as to come up with a plan for the Budget Committee to use to think about how to address the problem we're going to have down the road where we have to do a number of roads to keep them open. And we've been asked to put something together by the budget process this coming year, which is going to start in a couple of months. One of the things we did on how we prioritized roads is we set up a spreadsheet on the roads that were flooding in town and rated them basically based on, the class of the road, the condition, how many houses were on the road, how many businesses. We set up kind of a checklist for us to check against when we were picking projects in order of their importance. We could probably think about using something like that to give to the town. I have a problem with explaining this because the town is going to make the decision how they spend this money. I mean, how much and how they're going to fund it. We can only come up with a plan for them to think about. We can't say we should have we can try to have grants, but I guess and I have a hard time with this because they're looking for input from us and giving them direction, but yet they have to be able to run with this and take it in the direction. When you talk about money and how much to put in the budget, that becomes their bailiwick. So,
So are we to provide guidance then on what we think are the highest priority factors for them to consider? Is that our task?
Factors,
Okay.
yeah. And I imagine, and we're not only talking about roads, we haven't talked about it too much, but we're going to probably start talking about when you're rating a project, at some point, some projects you're going to walk away and just say, you're going to retreat because it's not even cost effective to try to do that. It came up, when you have 6 feet of sea level rise, you're going to have a lot of more islands in town than we have now. And you're not going to be able to raise the roads high enough.
Do we have to change it to a bridge building budget? Just kidding.
It might be, yeah. So,
I mean, we, basically, our analysis just went up to 4.6 feet, but that's anticipated in a long time from now.
yeah, and that's taking you to the next century.
Yeah,
I believe.
That's, yeah.
So, so those are some of the concerns we got to think about. So if we could start to, I'm looking for some thoughts of what we might structure into this as we start to think about it. And then we'll put something together and we can keep working it once we have something to start with.
I mean, Mary Ann, I have a few copies of the summary of the road thing for
Yeah, and I
people
have-
who are new. who
Yeah,
might
that would
want
be
to-
good, yeah. We could give
I
copies
can
if anybody's
pass
looking for that.
around. I only have 4
I have a bunch here
copies.
too. I have some
Yeah,
too.
but some of the newer people on the committee might
Yeah.
want to take a look at that.
So,
Would you guys?
so those of you who are in the business of doing this,
Yeah.
top-level planning, I'm looking for some ideas.
So Mary Ann, I know you said it's difficult to describe. Are you asking this committee would have input to the town to say, we think you should put money away, and this is, and assuming you do, and take on these projects, these are the priorities we would recommend?
Yeah, for example, if the Budget Advisory Committee wants to start putting money aside or planning for this in the budget, I think it would be helpful for them to have a prioritization. We have a number of projects that we've mentioned. There will probably continue to be new projects. We need to have some way to give that some prioritization. And a lot of this works into the capital road budget as well. Many times when it's time to do a major capital road budget, just as we did on Basin Point Road, which comes up over and over again. We knew it was going to cost, and this is in 2018, $600,000 to do, I think it was like 250 feet, to raise the culvert area by the end of Basin Cove. It would have doubled the project cost to do the whole road. And it was determined that it probably wouldn't be really necessary for 15 years before there would be that much climate change. When questioning the engineer how long he thought the road would last before it would be ready again, he said about 15 years. So the determination was based on, we had information to make a financial decision that you wouldn't be gaining much by doing it now, but the next time around, you would want to do it. So that's kind of how that played out. And I'm looking at you, Billy, because you're down the end of Basin Point Road. You were part of the first project we did, and I'm curious how that affects, the thinking of this affects you.
I mean, what's it going to cost in 15 years to fix?
Probably twice as much, right?
I would say much more than twice as
Or
much.
probably,
Yeah.
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 So,
I mean, it's important. I mean, that road has restaurants and houses, and people live down there year-round. It's it's a community, so really important.
and that was the reason, that was the first road we did.
Yeah.
Just for that reason. There was 100 houses.
Yep.
Yep. At the
and-
time, it was 100 residents,
That's right.
100 homes in
Yeah.
that
Yep.
area. And the cost was 1.6 million.
That was for more than 3 feet, though. That was
Yes,
6
no,
feet.
that was for 1 to 2 feet.
Was it?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't think so.
And that was, we did that study in December of 2018, so
Yeah,
the number is
difference.
probably higher by now.
Yeah.
And now the road is beautiful, and people speed, and that's a whole other,
That becomes another issue,
I
right?
hear about that all the time.
That's right.
That's a good point.
It's funny, when I first moved here, I used to hear people say that, and I'd say, that makes no sense. But the longer I'm here, it does.
when you drive out there, you can see where the water is going to come over the road.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can.
So, I think, to your point, Jay, that's what we're trying to address.
Mary
And
Ann,
it would, oh,
Go ahead.
sorry.
No,
It
go
would
ahead, Jay.
also feed into why, we're not going to decide whether money's put aside, but giving those kinds of priorities and that information would be toward, this would be a good idea. And then it's up to others to decide.
Right.
one of the things that you have mentioned, but we haven't emphasized today, is that town landings are also to be considered. And I think they are as high a priority as roads. And obviously, you have to have roads to the town landings, but given how much of our economy and how many of our people rely on access to the water for themselves and their boats, I think they've got to be high priorities.
Yeah.
And some of those are already included with the roads, like Bethel Point or, yeah.
It's interesting, we have a lot of working waterfront, but we don't have any town-owned working waterfront, do we?
Mitchell Field will be.
Well, other than Winchell Field.
Well, and Bethel Point.
I mean, all the landings are.
Well,
working
the
waterfront.
landings, I guess.
The landings are the
I
highest
think
priority, for
I'm
sure.
thinking of wharves, and
No, we used to have.
we don't have
a dock.
public wharves. Oh,
think
we did.
technically Potts Point is one.
I'm sorry?
There
I
are,
think technically Potts Point, even though I think there was only one commercial fisherman that went out of there.
yep.
Yeah.
Old Street.
I'd like to
Pardon?
figure out some way to,
Street.
be interesting to know from the industry, actually, what is a way the town could be helpful in that, to that sector, of the private lobster co-ops, and whether it's even needed. That would be really interesting to know.
I'd love to see us maintain, increase, save what we've got, access, not just boats, but to the flats. It's disappearing dramatically.
Which I think eventually will put a greater value on the landings themselves, where you can access the water. If you're losing access on land, getting to the water and accessing those places via water becomes more valuable as you move forward.
And get an airboat,
Yeah, right. I mean,
because you have to.
It's interesting, there's 6 of the roads on the list here that do have public landings or wharfs. So it's a fair number.
Yep.
When we looked at the maps at the comp plan, big idea about working waterfront, when you look at the maps, there's very little that's designated working waterfront, but what's really working waterfront is a lot more than that. I don't
Yes.
understand the designation versus reality, and I don't know if that is something that is a problem. But very little was designated on the map.
I think it's shoreline business, right? I'm not sure. You guys are on the committee.
yeah, I mean, I think that most of it is privately owned.
Exactly.
Most of it is commercial fishing zoned. Some are shoreline business, but very little is
Very
shoreline
little.
business in town.
Yeah.
It's a very small proportion.
And you remember, Billy, when that was,
Yeah, we
talked-
did that in, 2015 or something?
something like that, yeah.
Are there landings, are there places where people have access to the water with a boat that are privately owned?
Ramps themselves, like,
Yeah, yeah.
so the Dolphin is.
Well, there's the Dolphin,
The
yeah.
Dolphin, which is a great ramp, and again, the parking is always the biggest deal with the landing. You can access the water, but if you have no place to park,
Yeah.
That's sort of the story with town landing too.
exactly, it's
Yeah.
always the deal. So
Is
I
there-
think that from the working waterfront aspect, I think more places to park if they could use the landing, the town trying to acquire property around the landings themselves.
That's
been,
interesting.
Thought up.
Are there any places besides the Dolphin that you guys can think of?
Bethel
there's-
Point,
Great Island
Great
Boatyard?
Island Boatyard,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, but there's also the, what Finest Kind has, I think it's somewhat tidal in Basin Cove.
Yeah, it's not, it's a wood ramp, it's not like a great access. You need to have like a winch on your truck to kind of winch yourself down, so it's not like because wood's slippery in the water.
And I think it's
so
still pretty tidal, and
It's tidal, yeah.
What about places like Witten's? That's privately owned.
Privately owned, and the landing, there was a railway there, and there's in the process of possibly rebuilding the ramp, but it's not usable now, but, yeah, Bethel Point, Garrison Cove, Mackerel,
Lookout.
what's that?
Look out.
Lookout Point and the Dolphin are the highest used ramps in town.
Are there ramps in Brunswick or Phippsburg that we're not including because we're thinking Harpswell? Are there some that are close by that are used by Harpswell water people?
Mildred Landing is a heavily used land.
That's very, very heavy for shellfishing especially.
That's,
Which one, I'm sorry?
shape, I might add.
Hildreth?
Hildreth.
Yeah.
Just north of the bridge?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there is some within the budget for a repair set. It's my understanding that it's supposed to be.
Pretty rough ride down that road.
Yeah.
And there's no parking either. I mean, parking is along the side of the road, right?
2 or 3 trailers, maybe.
Yeah, and it's,
There's like right now, because I just came from there,
Mm-hmm.
there's like debris of a float. I'm not sure. It looks like maybe someone's peeling it apart, but it's taking up a good chunk of where typically harvesters.
To park?
Yeah.
Is this off Hildreth Road right over
Yeah.
here?
You wouldn't really know it's there. It's a really small dirt
it
road,
looks
there's a
like a
house right
little,
there.
yeah.
It's pretty tight, but it's a
Is it
super
really?
high valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that because it looks so narrow
It's like a
It's
secret
and
spot, but-
rugged.
rugged, but it's still heavily used.
It's heavily used. In fact, this,
The ramp at Garrison
Where is that
Cove's in
place?
really rough shape, too.
Hildreth
Yeah.
Road, so
Sure,
it's
but Billy could probably- Billy, would you say the ramp at Garrison Cove's in really bad shape too?
terrible.
Can you use that?
terrible, yeah.
I have a 4-wheel drive truck, so I can use it, but if you didn't, you wouldn't be able to use it.
It's like only got tar on half of it.
Well, I
Yeah.
think the only salvation is the sand is fairly hard packed there. So I think that's.
But a big truck with two-wheel drive would just dig down, like you wouldn't be able to use it, so.
Yeah.
We have 4-wheel drive, so we're able to get out of it, but
Right.
that ramp, we used to use that ramp all the time.
You're talking the one by Cook's?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's used heavily in the fall. I know Bowden pulls their boats out there.
Yep.
It's,
A lot of recreational too.
and recreation, very heavily used, and we did do an assessment on that, so we have the cost to upgrade
We
that.
tried to get the grant.
We tried to get the grant, we didn't, but,
Okay, let me ask this question once more. Are there places in Brunswick nearby, like Muir Point? Not Muir Point, just before you get to the Gurnett Princess Point, there's a boat ramp there. Do people in Harpswell use that one? Are there any in Phippsburg?
The tide rips so hard there. If
Okay.
you launch a boat and something goes wrong, you're headed the
Okay.
wrong way up the bridge or down the bay,
On a
like,
really good day, but it's
Okay,
not the best fall.
And what about Phippsburg, say up by, there's a boat ramp near a park just south of Old Route 1? Pardon? Sawyer Park? Sawyer Park.
that's a west
And-
That's
path.
Brunswick.
Okay, west.
That's heavily used. And
By
that's-
people here in Harpswell?
we use it a lot for people that fish in Harpswell, for sure. Muir Point, but again, a lot of these places you can't park overnight, there's a
Okay.
limitation,
Okay.
that, or it closes at 5 or something, or, but Mitchell Field will be very valuable if that ever comes to fruition. I think that would be heavily used.
Is that part of the plan, that you could park overnight there?
I don't think that's been figured out, but.
I don't think
we
it's-
kind of-
There's a pilot project right now that allows a certain amount of overnight parking with the permit. That may expand.
We might, as I think about this project that we have to give to that would be a way for us to kind of delineate some focus for that town to think about putting money in. When we start talking about landings and acquiring land, none of this is brand new. We've been talking about it, but not with any focus. That might be something for us to consider putting in
Oh, I know, right there. Yeah, I know it.
to this
That's what I thought. I just didn't know.
document that
Name
we're
of the road,
trying to
yes,
put
yeah.
together.
Mary
I
Ann?
feel like you could also prioritize the repair and maintenance and the resiliency of the landings. There's town roads, but there's also all the access. Maybe you could prioritize like the project that you worked on for Garrison Cove,
Right, right.
because that would, give some resiliency to the commercial fishermen.
And I
Mary Ann,
guess,
can I ask about the Budget Advisory Committee?
Yes.
Are they looking for guidance as to how much money they want to raise all the money before starting this work?
I'm not
or-
sure how they're planning it. I think they're looking to have a way to start thinking about it. And maybe they would say, we will start, I'm just throwing this out. The town will start putting X amount of dollars away. And with the view on bonding for projects over a certain amount. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how the process exactly works now on other projects that they
Well,
budget for.
I think this is something where bonding makes a lot of sense.
Oh,
because
yeah.
It means the people who are actually getting the benefit of it are the ones paying for it, rather than people putting money aside for 5 or 10 years and then finally having enough money.
Right.
And then building it out of money that was collected over all that time. It's, you know, for a project, any of these projects, it makes sense. They're long-term, they're long life. And it's, you know, yes, there's interest payments on it, but that's not that huge compared to getting it done sooner and not, I mean, prices keep getting away from us.
Right, yeah.
And, you know, so what they're looking for is guidance for how much would it cost to do this 2 years from now, and then plan on, you know,
I don't think so. I mean, I can go back to Margaret Kelly, who used to always push back on, the town makes the decision the best way to spend them, Do we bond? Do we collect the money ahead of time? Do we appropriate it? That's their job.
I
So-
understand that. I'm just
So
saying
I'm
that-
trying to
that-
figure out how to work towards that and give the Budget Advisory Committee what they're looking for.
Okay, but what I'm asking is, are they looking for a number that we can set aside before starting, or are they looking for a number that they can plan on for funding it, however it gets funded?
I don't know.
Okay.
Can't
I
answer
mean,
that
I think that's important, because,
Okay.
these things get put off, and then the price goes up and up and up, and you're chasing it, and instead, it has two advantages. One, you can do the work sooner, and second, the people who are actually getting the benefit will be the ones paying it off.
And Mitchell Field's a great example of that. I mean, we've been chasing that for 10 years. And it has gone up from $300,000 to, what, 2.6 or whatever it is now? So, I
Exactly,
mean, we don't
yeah.
have to look too far. And everyone's done their best job, but I mean, there's been a lot of lost, I mean, the opportunity to use that property has been lost in that time. So at some point.
So I think those are good points that we can put in our
Yeah.
document.
I'm also hearing that independent of the cost, landings are a high priority, is what I'm hearing today from this group. That Harpswell loses its sense of who it is, and it loses its an economic driver if we don't include landings as a major priority. It's not just the roads, but we've got
Yeah,
to
gotta
have,
continue
have to have
landings.
viable landings.
Yeah,
That could be
I- I
accessed
see.
24 hours a day. Because people that work in the water go there at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they might not come back till 2 o'clock in the morning. And if the gate's closed, the value of that property is zero, because you can't access it. So
Right.
Mary Ann, it seems like we need a sheet like this
Yeah.
to summarize all
To
our
summarize
landings
some of-
and
summarize our landings.
the potential costs and,
Now, we keep talking about Bethel Point, we keep talking about Garrison Cove. Are there other landings we should be highlighting?
I mean, maybe we can go on with a small group to get the list
Yeah,
put together
yeah.
and, the needs and stuff.
And then the,
You can go from there.
What's-
I'm looking at Ken because he's the landing guy. Well, not, but you know of all the
Well, I
time.
mean, I think we say prioritize, I think we'd end up prioritizing probably 6 of the, if you look at the landing list, I think it's more than a dozen.
Right.
But realistically, it's probably 6 or so that we really want to put the priority on. You got your Garrison, your Lookout, of course, Bethel, Mackerel Cove, Potts Point, what am I missing? Hildreth,
It's pretty important,
Yeah.
the used one is probably in the roughest shape, really, I mean, Bell's Point's awful too, but.
Yeah.
And I mean,
And whereas like perhaps it's technically a landing at Wharf Road and at Merritt House, but those have very minimal value at this point. I know town lands, we've looked at ways of possibly using them better, but no great answers at this point.
You don't have a lot of room there, do you, to?
No, like Wharf Road, the thing we come up with is there's no parking, but, okay, one person can use it, and yes, you block it, but at least one person would get to use it, so you can just,
Culver Street is pretty limited on the space there, but
right.
Yeah.
we used to use that a lot. We haven't used that ever in like years.
because there's no parking.
Because we used to turn around Harmon's, had to turn around Harmon's driveway to get around, whatever, but it's tight down there.
It really
And it became sort of controversial because the bottom of it's, part of that's private too.
Right.
I was going to ask about that. It's a little different, but are there barriers like, I mean, I know they're for access to the flats. Landowners don't allow it. And then there are roads where neighbors are upset about traffic on it. How much, is there anything we can do about that, and how much of a problem is it? Like Stover's Cove, I'm thinking, is, that road is awful, and the
Oh,
neighbors-
out to the Missouri. I know it's a hard one for the land trust, and of course, that's mainly recreational use. But it's, I don't know, there's a good solution for that.
No.
There is another town landing on Stover's that's long before it.
Yes, right before it, yeah.
Stover, but it's pretty tidal.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
What about the new place? I want to call it Clark's Cove. Is it Clark's?
Clark-
On the neck, sticking east, facing east, that the state owns? I know, I just opened a huge can of worms. But,
Yeah, it's
As,
Glasgow.
I'll just say, as I'm saying, I think that's at least at this point geared a little bit towards recreation, just based on the confines the state got. I think the state got a grant to buy it back in the early 1970s, and it's my understanding there's certain restrictions on
Restrictions.
it, possible recreation, and the other catch is, it's not a quick, it's a nice walk down the water, but as far as getting like a boat trailer down the water, that's,
It'd be pretty tough, and neighbors would be really upset.
and that would be, probably put in a new road because, the road down to it, is private.
Yeah.
That would be popular.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm wondering if we can put together a listing of the landings. Between Brittany, Billy, and Ken, we could get a listing of landings that we would like to consider putting,
Significant economic value landings.
yeah, yeah.
And then if there need for repairs and things, we can maybe try to get some grant money.
Well, yeah, but for now, I'm thinking of this, just
No,
to
but
get
I
this.
mean, we need some
The
notes
information.
We need some
about,
information,
is this
yeah.
something that potentially would need grant money? Because this sounds like a good grant for the
Yeah.
one we identified.
And also, the Lands Committee has done this already, those that have properties nearby that might come on the market.
For parking. It's been on the radar, I mean.
I know it's been on your radar, but you might have some right off the top of your head, I don't know.
Not right now.
Okay, okay.
How transferable do you think the engineering study for Garrison Cove would be to any of these other landings? Is it a unique thing? Is it a one-off? I'm just
Garrison
thinking-
Yes.
Cove especially is
Yeah,
one-off.
okay,
'cause
definitely.
that's special
Yeah.
beach mitigation as well.
Okay.
Well, fortunately, land is cheap.
Maybe the houses that get flooded there all the time will sell that property for parking. Okay, so,
Can I make this is a comment back on something we were talking about earlier in relationship to the costs of roads and sea level rise and what could you do, and it might cost too much money, and every time we wait, it gets more and more expensive, but we have talked about the fact that flooding is a temporary thing. And as we look to engineering to fix our problems, the other issue we talked about earlier was an emergency response system. So in an emergency response system, you could look at it and say, we've identified the individuals and the homeowners in this town that are most at risk of a flooding event. This flooding event that is coming is related to this storm, et cetera. Perhaps there's another approach here, which is the provision of support for people that are at risk. And I don't know what that means, but, if people need help to get out, or there's a place they need to be temporarily housed, or, there could be other non-engineering solutions here for something that the longer we go round and round on this problem, the less and less likely it is that we're going to be raising $10 or $15 million in 20 years' time to try to address this. the study that's coming up, that we're going to look at is saying, well, and, some areas are going to be more at risk than others. As we heard, some areas are quite low risk. In some areas, maybe it's super high risk. We get that information, and then we say, well, maybe we can narrow down what our options really need to be. But I know we frequently go to engineering as the only way to get our way out of this. And we may be forced into it just isn't going to work. So if that isn't going to work, what do we do? And in that context, when we go down there, what is our emergency response? It turns us back to the landings, where if the landings are appropriate and we have a lot of, there are a lot of boats and people know how to use them, and, it may be that this is also part of our emergency response. So I'm just
I think you're
offering
right.
that there may be other ways we need to think about this, but when you come back to it, the actual roads themselves may be just a disaster, short-term disaster for us, whereas the landings are more flexible in terms of rising and lowering tides and the flooding events that go with them. And the question then becomes their relationship, those landings' relationship to the very places that get isolated. So I don't think we've tried to look at it from that lens, but or maybe you have, and I just haven't been part of that
No, we
discussion.
haven't. And in fact, as Nancy, you might want to, when we started talking about Dingley,
Yeah.
I think that's a good opportunity to talk about that a little bit. I think that's helpful.
So Tim, I had that conversation informally with some friends right after the engineers gave their assessment of how much it would cost for an engineering solutions to get to Dingley Island. And I think your idea of a 19th century, let's get to people by way of water is as people did here in Harpswell, certainly before the bridge was put in the 70s, is if you needed to get somewhere and the road didn't exist or wasn't accessible, you did it by boat. And clearly in Harpswell, we can continue to do that. Right after the engineering, 2 days after the engineering study public session was held, including Dingley Island, it was Lowell's Cove and Dingley Island, I met with some friends. There were about 8 of us. Many of the people in that group had been to that session with the engineers. And it became very clear that on that road in particular, there isn't a viable engineering solution, and even the box walls wouldn't work for Dingley Island because the span is so long. People said, I have plenty of room in my house. That 4 people volunteered saying, we've got space, I've got 3 extra bedrooms. And in Harpswell, there are some houses with many extra bedrooms. Not in the summer when the family comes to visit, but certainly in January, yes. They said they can come stay with us. So then it's a case of getting the word out and doing some sort of survey. Do you have space? Can people come and stay with you and so on? That's a human-centered solution as opposed to an engineering-centered solution. And it was volunteered by 4 out of 8 people at this gathering. So I think that's the strength of Harpswell. And Peter Lieberworth always used to say, while he was a member of this group, it's neighbors as lifelines. And I think we need to think about it as a low-cost, coordinating solution as opposed to a high-cost engineering solution. And it's not, one size isn't going to fit all in all cases. But I like your idea of using a landing as a touchstone. We've got these landings. Who's in reach from a landing as opposed to who's in reach from Harpswell Island Road or the Harpswell Neck Road. I think that's a great way to think about it geographically. And the data that we're going to be getting from this study that's just been funded might be really useful in that regard.
And the community response, if you think about, we talk about what are the emergency responses and what are the the emergency response kits and having these available. But one of them is, usually we have advanced warning, and it can be that you can get out of your house and go somewhere. So we don't actually need the landings, but in the event that somebody gets missed or there's a problem and maybe the flooding lasts longer and people have to get back for something. I mean, there's that other way of thinking about it. But, you can come back to some of the first studies on who survived, massive heat events in Chicago, and it was the people that were connected to other people.
Right.
Right? And we sort of forget that there's a human response that we might be able to rely on. And And, one of the things that we have talked about on this committee a bunch is that our need to communicate these different options are. So I think there's maybe a way for us to weave these things together, and you go back to the value of doing the money on an engineering study. The value of that study may be to conclude that we're not going to do things work.
Right, exactly.
Right? It's just, we keep going back, well, how are we going to raise the money? Oh, I know, let's come up with a short-term fix. And yet there may still be places where we decide, okay, there is one place where it really does make sense.
Yeah,
But I think that's got to be part of our,
I think you're right.
our more like expansive or creative solutions here.
I mean, I think there's flooding, and then there's sea level rise.
Yes.
And sea level rise is a different concept in many ways.
Correct.
Because when they're talking about 1 to 2 feet, that means that road is going to be underwater permanently.
Right.
Or at least twice a
Or
day.
Twice a
at
day.
least,
Yeah.
twice a
Correct.
day, so that.
Correct, and,
That's a different concept than what happens with flooding.
You're right, and
Yeah.
especially the reasons for doing this study is that I'm still convinced that the numbers that we're using for sea level rise are low.
Yeah.
I know everyone is working at 2050, but
Yeah.
depending on where you look on the East Coast, they are going much faster.
Yeah.
And we could easily, in a new study, get a very updated thing that says, oh, yeah, you think it's 2050? Actually, it's 2030.
And some of our studies were back in 2018, and things
Yes.
have changed since then.
Things have
gotten
changed.
worse.
Things have,
So some of these are optimistic in terms of when the road will be permanently flooded.
Howie, you were going to say
I was,
something.
I was just going to say that there might be a combination here of
Yeah,
the engineering could be possibly scaled back, not to making the roads usable in the worst case, but making sure when the waters recede, the road is still there, and hardening the road.
Yes.
Because in January 2024, you couldn't get to Potts Point until they put the railing back because
Oh, that's right. That's
across the
right.
road, because the way it's just stuck into the rocks. Clearly, if something more secure had been used to put that, you wouldn't have had the railing pushed all the way across the road. And so it may be that making sure that the roads are, hardened, and expect them to get flooded at high tide, but just to make sure they'll still be there when it goes away.
What you're talking about, Tim, makes me think about Harpswell Aging at Home.
yes,
And a very robust communication system already exists, and a volunteer group of over 400 people. I don't want to say it in terms of committing, but I wonder if that could be a communication resource around just what, and Nancy before has said, we've got to include water in our emergency plan. I will bring it up, but I wonder if there could be a,
yes.
whatever the
I would
word
think.
is for that.
And Tim, that's why Gail Hayes meets with Jay and Mary Ann and me. She represents Harpswell Aging at Home, so
Well,
we're
me
putting-
too.
And you too. So when we're working on this brochure and other forms of communication, she's an avid player in that because of the network of HA.
Yep. And my, when you think about climate change as an issue and how there are many different opinions about it, I think a proactive, in the event of emergencies that we know happen, you just address it from that perspective and who is vulnerable in our community and how can we use our resources. If we walk down that path, then you can have a dialogue and do positive things and hopefully avoid, the possibility that we're not able to have a dialogue about these things.
I think the January 2024 storms took what was hypothetical and made
Yeah,
it
they
real
did.
in many people's minds.
Yeah.
I think what you're making me think of too is knocking down barriers, not like the box walls, but,
Yeah, different kinds of barriers.
but like a lot, for example, we always say, not everybody's on internet. So that's not an answer, that's an issue that we have to figure out.
Correct.
So, and, HA helps people get the button for emergencies. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a problem, but it isn't the end. So we have to figure out, you and Peter have also talked a lot about North Carolina, and the people who did okay were people, the communication system was cell phone. So if you have that, so anyway,
Yeah,
looking
and-
at the barriers as opportunities.
And in this emergency kit, you can still buy a transistor radio online for like $40 or something, and HAW gives some of them out. So if we build in, you can turn a dial on a radio and find a station, like the local station, to get information. All you need is
I still do
a
that.
radio
I still have a radio that does that.
And a radio station.
and a radio station. That's right.
So it's getting late. I think we need to wind this down. But I think we got a really bunch of good ideas. Ken and Tim and Deirdre and anyone else would like to put some of the thoughts that were directed more towards you down and send them along. I'll put something together. But I think we have the beginning of a good project recommendation, because it's going to be a little more rounded out to talk about more than just engineering roads.
And I think we've evolved away from necessarily saying we want a $200,000 budget. We aren't going to go to the budget advisory requesting 200,000.
No.
Is that,
We'll request a little less this year to replace what we spent, but
But this is the whole idea of putting together sort of a more comprehensive town-based approach to how we address emergency response to severe weather, right? Which pretty much I think people could agree with.
yeah.
The question is, what do we do and how do we organize it? That is also something you could get, I suspect, we could get a grant to
Yes.
help get some support to put together a group of people, conduct some meetings, gather information, create a nice report, then that helps in a communication plan. But I mean, it's another reason what this committee is doing is like, okay, you sit around, you chew the fat, try to figure out some ideas, but then you try to coalesce around an idea that we could then maybe go find some funding to help make it real. And I think there's a lot of interest in towns self-organizing to help figure out what can they do within the resources that they have. And I keep coming back to, we just keep saying we're never going to have the resources to raise some of these roads. What are we going to do? And I think we need to have an answer for that. And this is moving us in that direction.
Sounds
or I
good.
think answers for different.
Answers.
a lot of
Yeah,
different-
answers.
Yes.
There's also recognition that we've got to look regionally,
Yeah.
townwide, but also like the mid-coast region.
Right.
Sean, I'm curious of how we're going to interface with the Housing Committee. And if you have, I'm trying to think of how we can be helpful to what you're doing. And also if you have some thoughts you'd like to leave with us to think about. I realize it's very general, but it's kind of a different direction that we've included housing. But I think it fits in.
I think that something that comes to my mind is that there are 911 addresses, and then there are a number of people that are actually at place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of those places don't have that many people there usually. Bethel Point might actually have 24 human beings down past the culvert, and probably same with other ones. I'm not sure that the 911 address is a huge
Oh, I see what you're saying here.
useful metric for people that are actually being housed in these different places for emergencies.
Right.
I guess that's something that came up that I was thinking about.
It was a way that, we were trying to figure out how many people lived off of Basin Point Road, and we used 911 addresses from the tax map. That's how we came up with it, but that's a good point.
But are they residents, I suppose?
Exactly.
Most of them are
Yeah,
on that
on
road.
Basin Point?
Yeah, there's a lot of residences.
Yeah,
I mean, most
but-
people
A
live there.
lot less seasonal than some places.
Yes, very
Yeah,
much.
but it would be good to know that,
But that comes up.
that would be
yeah.
good to know,
In-
how many are seasonal and how many are that could be done fairly quickly, too, I would think.
Yeah, as far as support for housing, I'm not sure what there is to say. This is giving me a lot to think about, and yeah, it's a challenge all around.
Yeah, yeah, great. And Dan, you're sitting here from Planning Board. How does that
Yeah,
come across?
I'm just fascinated by the idea that we start with saying, how much money do we have to throw at these ideas? As opposed to saying, well, money's one component of it, but, you know, we can combine that with other interactions with individuals. The idea of thinking of the landings as something other than a place to just take your boats in and out as being a part of an emergency response system is something that I think is a true added value and something that I really hadn't thought about before.
And given that Cundy's Harbor has been given an amphibious boat, is that right? And there's also, Paul has one, so, you know, maybe we need to have more high-wheeled fire trucks and more amphibious boats if we're thinking about landings or things that aren't landings, but if you had an amphibious vehicle, you could
Be a
get
good
ashore.
conversation to have with the fire and the three,
How well do amphibious vehicles do in storm events on the water, not on the land?
Well, we have,
and duck boats.
Somehow I think about a duck boat out there, I think it's gonna be,
we have a town airboat, and that's been used for rescues, for
Yeah.
fire stuff, people stuck on the ice, or people who are missing, people with memory issues, that has been used. And not just by Harpswell, but.
Yeah, so I think we need to do a holistic view of what we have.
An inventory of what we have.
And
that can be-
opportunities for
yeah.
using what we have to make a comprehensive plan.
But even thinking in terms of people with different kinds of boats who might be a part of an emergency response team.
Yes.
Yeah.
It always comes to the people. The people are gonna be,
That's
Yeah.
right.
right,
that's the resource, that's resiliency, right? People
That's
create
it, the
resiliency.
people.
It's
Neighbors is lifelines.
Just take care of each other,
Lifesavers.
you know? The rest of it's money and all that other crap, but most important is
I
people
think-
in your neighborhood.
and I believe that's a really important message that we should weave into whatever comes out on this, from this committee, is that, you know, people are where the resilience is found.
100%.
And that's a really important thing for us to reinforce that message, because then that leads you to, with that as sort of a theme, then everything we just talked about is like, oh yeah, now that makes sense. Well, what are we gonna, you know, what are the people gonna do? Not like, how big is your wallet to pay for $5 million to put a bunch of cement across the road? Now, I'm not saying that we wouldn't still have to do that, and it may be necessary to do.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be the first thing.
Margaret, you had something you wanted?
Yeah, but you guys can finish your discussion. It's a procedural thing.
Oh,
Can I just mention, this is also making me think of things that are happening already, like the landowner appreciation event that the Shellfish Committee or people from it do. And I know Matt Gillies talking about doing a fisherman's festival or something. Not that we butt in on it, but that we support it, because it speaks to just what Billy was talking
Yeah.
about.
right,
Ties
right.
is a really big deal. It's one of the beautiful things about Harpswell, I think, is in the face of a tragedy, people tend to come together.
Right, right.
Yeah, they do.
So, yes, I would agree with that.
So just to sort of wrap it up then,
I have one more item.
sure, yeah.
I know we want to wrap up, but in the context of, you know, severe events or hazards, I just wanted to report on, we all know that there was the foam
PFAS.
fire, PFAS event, I didn't realize that 50,000 gallons were dumped and made it into our waterway. So the big question is, what impact does it really have? And there's a lot unknown about that. I work for the Biodiversity Research Institute, which is based out of Portland, Maine, and we do work all over the state, often assessing the impacts of chemical contamination on wildlife. We had been doing a study up here in and around Harpswell that was actually triggered by an overall decline in the common eider, and it was driven by the Maine, Department of Fish and Wildlife saying, why is this eider declining? And it wasn't clear why. So there's been doing this background research trying to get a better sense. The report isn't out. I'm told that, the common theory was that it was the blackback gull and high levels of blackback gull that was the reason for the common eider, because they prey on the common eider.
I don't
chick.
see very many of them.
Now, there are a couple places where they're more dense, and there are some places where people think that they're really increasing. So anyway, that was one of the common theories, and it turns out that doesn't seem to be the explanation. So the question is, what is it? But anyway, the reason I tell you that part is that meant that the common eider, we had been out sampling the common eider for the last 3 years, and this was last year was the last year of that. But that last year happened before the spill. So now the state has come back to us and said, gee, can you guys extend that study? Because now we can go back to those same places and we can catch the eiders again and find out, are they making it into the food web? So it's, and there are other organizations within Harpswell and Brunswick that are doing this. So there's a lot of people doing it, but it's been fantastic that the state actually had funding to try to do something, to really understand what can we learn from this event. And the challenge with learning about events is you don't know they're going to happen, so you don't have anything to compare it to.
Right.
And the problem with PFAS is we know it's bad. We know pretty much any level is bad, but we don't really know how bad it is and how much it might impact the way populations, do. So my hope is that, and this study is going to go on for this year, and it's at least 1 more year, and maybe 2 more years, will give us some insight into that. But it's right here in Harpswell, and that's where I've been doing it. I was at Zoom, and I just want to say, it is a little part of resilience. It's not usually what we're talking about, but it is how well can our systems that we rely on bounce back from any kind of perturbation is what resilience is. So.
I sent it over to the Conservation Commission today because there is a gentleman by the name of Lee McIlvaine, who is a geologist and works for the Army Corps in Philadelphia, lives on Orr's Island. And he sent through today a series of webinars talking about PFAS. And I'd be glad to, I'll forward that to
Great.
you. You might want to, because I sent it to the Conservation Commission because Lee has been very involved with a lot of our water projects that we talk about in town, and road flooding, erosion. So-
And back to the communications angle, because working on this was interesting for me, because I knew they were coming up here, and I got sort of short notice on it, and they know I live here, as I said, well, we're going to go to these places, what do you think? So I made some suggestions about where they should go, but I wasn't really sure. But where did I go to find information? I went to the Anchor. And there was fantastic coverage in the Anchor about the people that they interviewed. I found out who was working on this. I mean, my level of understanding of what was going in my backyard was really improved by the great reporting. And as we've said earlier at the beginning, the Anchor's been a really important
They've been
outlet
very
for us. And
important, yeah.
I just think it's a wonderful resource, and part of the people and the response is the Anchor should remain as a very important part of all of our strategies, because we should continue to report and get articles out in the Anchor because it's relied on, people read it.
That's right.
People that, your barrier, that people aren't always on the web, but people read the Anchor. And so it reinforced to me that that's another part, a really important part of this community that we need to make. I mean, I'm not saying we aren't doing it, but we should keep doing it.
Right.
The Anchor might be very interested in your eider study.
Yes, I'm sure they would be.
Okay.
But the Anchor is, we're so lucky.
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah,
And it's people who made that happen.
Right.
It was a for-profit paper, went out of business. People said, we need a paper. Not everybody has that.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Send them money.
I just want to talk about
You, Jay.
a summer meeting schedule, perhaps. I'm not sure, maybe we meet once during July and August, only because, well, I'm traveling the beginning of August. I'm also having company at the beginning of July, but I think I can do, we can stick with the first Tuesday in July, which is the first. Or we could pick a later day in the month, but whenever we try to change this meeting, we run against
All the other ones.
all the other town.
And I think we picked up a couple more people, it's gonna make it even more
Yeah.
tricky.
So, we can go with like the first July and then maybe go into either the 1st of September for our next meeting,
Which is Labor Day. No, the 2nd, September 2nd is the
Yeah.
first Tuesday.
if that sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Oh, no, make us come to a meeting in August.
And then you have
We've
to
got
run it.
nothing going on.
Margaret, I think you were going to.
Oh, yeah, no, I just wanna, I don't think you guys have done the election of officers yet.
Didn't we?
We did.
You did?
Yeah.
I don't
last
remember.
It was in the minutes.
All right, I couldn't remember, so I wanted to make sure, and now there's all these new people here, so,
Yeah.
that was all.
We did.
Yeah. Too many committees.
We did it really quickly when you brought it up.
Rotate secretary.
You brought it up and we got one nomination and shut it down.
Good.
All Robert's Rules of Orders.
Oh, and I didn't tell the new people, we don't have a secretary. We rotate minutes. So this month, Tim is doing them this month. And so, yeah,
It works well.
it works okay. It only happens once a year or so, now that the committee's
Yours.
bigger. So, very good. Is there anything else anybody'd like to bring up? If not, let's adjourn at 5:40.